again, and welcome back to Comics Online. Is this a podcast? I'm not sure, but we're going to have a real sit down with Owen and Morgan Rosenblum, the creators of RAMGOD, a new comic coming out later this month, maybe exactly on the day that you're watching this. So when does it debut?
July 24th, I believe.
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness.
That's when it hits
Right
store
around the corner.
shelves.
Right around the corner. So for those of us who were at Comic-Con that day.
Yep. Well, I believe, isn't that the day before Comic-Con, San Diego Comic-Con?
Well, they say that, but no, that's really the day that it starts. It's the preview night. You know, back in the old days, Comic-Con started on Thursday, as you say, and then there was like a comic book expo for retailers, and that would go as the retailers and publishers would get together and have their own expo. And that was Tuesday and Wednesday, and then they kind of got rid of that and turned it into just a preview night on Wednesday, and that's what we've had for the past, gosh, probably close to 20 years now.
Got it.
Anyhow, RAMGOD. First of all, let's tell us a little bit about yourselves and your entry into the comic book business.
For sure. Well, if the last name didn't give it away, we're brothers. Who is older? That's up for you to figure out. No, I'm older by 2 years, but Owen definitely, is the more mature one of the two.
The older soul. The older soul.
Yeah, the wiser soul, the more chill soul. I'm the more bubbly, energetic one. We got into comics kind of a different, like we started reading comics around the same time because our dad is the one that introduced it to us when we were like 6 or 7 or something like that. By bringing us to comic book shops, which became like our Toys R Us or FA or Schwartz type of thing. It was like comic store, like let's go. And then we would, go through the aisles and pick our favorite ones. But I started working in comics like 12 years ago when I just decided that I'd always been a creative individual, like a writer and an artist, and had been wanting to, I've been like drawing superheroes and my own characters for the longest time, and got away from that, like in my early 20s. And then as I was like getting further into like a sort of generic 9-to-5 sales job that really didn't feel like motivating to me, or it certainly wasn't my calling, I started like thinking this is not my path and I want to do something. Even if I can't do it professionally, I want to do something that like really means something to me. And so I wrote a comic book script, or I guess I wrote like a regular script, not knowing how to write a comic book script 12 years ago. And then like started searching the interwebs for the right artist to potentially hire to like sort of like convert my script into a comic. And that's what got me started on that. And ultimately I launched a Kickstarter that set me off on the journey. And then at that point I was like, this is what I need to be doing. I love comics. I love writing and art directing and all that stuff. And so
what was that first comic?
It's called Treadwater. It was a graphic novel. There's 2 out that we published through our company, Dark Rose Studios. Because like Dark Rose sort of started as like a creative studio, but also as like an indie publisher. We've since backed away from like indie publishing just because it's another beast. Like the creation process is its own thing, but then like the marketing and printing and distributing is like a whole different thing. And
so now RAMGOD is published through Massive. How'd you end up with Massive? I guess that's the greater journey here. Maybe maybe I'm getting ahead of myself.
Yeah, well, there's like a middle area too. So eventually I got an opportunity to work at Heavy Metal Magazine as like a projects manager or something like that. And then from that, I seized an opportunity to be like a junior editor, like an associate editor on like a short serial of Steve Orlando. It was like kind of the first one that I got to like co-edit. And I read his story and like had some ideas for characters, which is rare for like the editor to be like, hey, I want to draw some of your characters for this, if that's okay. And my editor-in-chief at the time, Tim Seeley, was like, yeah, but don't push him if he says no. Like you're allowed to swing, but like, you get one swing pretty much. Like, don't think you can keep coming back. Like you're not the artist on this. So I was like, okay, no problem. So I sent him some characters and he was like, yo, these are awesome. In fact, I sent him through, like Tim saw them and was like, these are pretty rad, dude. Like, yeah, sent them over to Steve. And then I sent them to Steve and Steve like reached out to me and was like, are you the one that did these? These are incredible. You're not an artist? And I was like, no. He's like really creative and fun and like awesome. And then so he was like, yeah, I would love to have you co-edit this short that he was doing. called String Theory, which was my first one. And then from there, like more opportunities opened up. And ultimately I became like a junior editor and then like editor. And then I worked my way up to managing editor and art director slash creative, ultimately became creative director at Heavy Metal. This was like right around 2020-ish now. And then so at that point, it was right around COVID, right? And Owen hit me up and was like, hey, I've been working on, I'll actually let you take this part of the story because.
Cool. I'll kick it back to you when it makes sense to talk about the massive kind of thing. Anyway, yeah, Morgan was working at Heavy Metal at that time. My background is not in comics and graphic novels. It's in video production. I had like a video production company for a long time that I was operating out of Brooklyn. And basically yeah, I kind of saw Morgan in this space and I was always interested in it. And I would help him out with obviously the production component of it. But when it came to like writing and the creative aspect, that was always more Morgan's cup of tea than mine. As I said, I'm a producer, so I would be making other people's creative visions into a reality and kind of like not my own. And then COVID hit and no one knew what to do with themselves. And it was kind of this like the great reset where everyone was like, well, what do I do now? And I was sitting there and I was like, you know what? I kind of want to write my own thing and like create my own world. And world building is huge for me and Morgan as well. And I was kind of like, I want to do something that's like cyberpunk because I think it's just kind of like an untapped genre where it's underutilized. And Morgan, actually, funny enough, at that time was playing the video game Cyberpunk 2077. And I had just watched Blade Runner 2049. And I was just like, it just was so present in front of mind. And we were like, you know what? I want to create this thing. And I went to him and Morgan was like, hey, I'm not going to give you preferential treatment here. I'm going to vet the hell out of your idea. So come prepared if you're going to pitch me. So I was like, okay. So I did that. And then he was like, yeah, I love this. And I was like, well, I need someone with your chops to get involved here. Do you want to partner with me and like kind of do this thing? And he was like, absolutely. And this was our first like creative endeavor really together from like a co-writing, co-creating standpoint. So this was new territory for us as brothers. We've worked together forever, but not in that capacity. So then anyway, we kind of refined the pitch and we did the whole story as much as we could. And then we brought it to Heavy Metal at that time, and Morgan was working there. And in the same way that Morgan wouldn't give me preferential treatment, they were not giving Morgan preferential treatment. So they vetted the hell out of us, but we're like, hey, even with our vetting, this is a great idea. We want to do it. And things went along with that. And then Heavy Metal ended up partnering at that time with Whatnot, which is kind of the parent company for Massive. And then one thing led to another. And now I'll kick it back to you, Morgan, which you can explain kind of the politics of that situation and how we ended up coming back to Massive.
Yep. So I said I'm formerly of Heavy Metal. The company kind of had some, financial issues and had to pause and furlough like the entire team. It was pretty abrupt, and like the goal like was to bring everyone back when they could, but it's tough in comics in general and in publishing. And so
a lot of creative.
Yeah, they
didn't come
so
back
like several
through
months.
COVID.
It was several months
Exactly.
turned into like a year, and our book was like our series was RAMGOD, that is, was just kind of like stuck in purgatory, and we were like trying to figure out, well, what do we do? Because they can't publish it right now. And like at one point we kind of knew that they weren't coming back anytime soon, at least not in the foreseeable future. And like a big part of our original agreement with them was to like get it, like we wanted to get it out sooner than later. And so luckily we had like a drop dead date that it had to be published by, otherwise the rights reverted back to us. And so they did, as the creators, because like also for full transparency, like we didn't take a writer's fee on this. Like we put all the money into the artists, just to make sure that like this series, the first one of the Brothers Bloom, was going to be something cool and special and like as great as it can be. And we were thinking more long term and less like we're doing this for the paycheck, and more like we're doing this for the story and like the brotherly bond of putting something out together. So anywho, they had paid for all the artwork, but couldn't, they as in Heavy Metal had paid for all the artwork, but lost the right to sort of publish it. So they were like stuck with a bunch of pages they couldn't use. Whereas like we had the rights to the story and the script and everything else, but didn't pay for the artwork. So we found a happy medium and we're able to like kind of negotiate like we'll buy the art back from you.
Sure.
So that we could, take it wherever whether we self-publish it or brought it to someone else. But before doing that, we reached out to Massive and we were like, hey, look, before we spend tens of thousands of dollars to get this artwork, like, would you guys be interested in publishing this still if we could get it back? And they were like, heck yeah. So we were like, okay, cool.
Because they always loved the story, and when they had their partnership with Heavy Metal at the time, they were like, okay, rather than having your series be featured in Heavy Metal magazine itself, we kind of want to make this be it's a standalone series outside. And we were like, happy as a pig and shit. We were like, yeah, absolutely, we would love that. And we already knew that they loved we loved working with them. They're super creative and very future facing. I say this all the time, and we had a good relationship then. And basically, as that kind of partnership dissolved between, Whatnot and Heavy Metal, and then our stuff with Heavy Metal, we went back to them. And once we had the ownership and the rights, and we're like, hey, you guys still want to do this? And they're like, you get it. We'll do it. We did. And now it's kind of like it's finally happening.
Nice. So
Yeah.
I saw that there are other things coming out from Massive, which is under this Whatnot umbrella. Um, are you guys one of the very first titles to come out under Massive?
No, I don't think so. They have the very first. No, they have several other ones that I've seen and read that are pretty cool.
Yeah.
We're probably like in like the second or third
wave.
Like, so wave, yeah, right. Like if there was like phase 1 or phase 2, I think we were in like phase 2 or 3 kind of thing.
Okay.
But the hope is that we become like a permanent fixture. If
Yeah.
this like we plan the series to be, while the first season or story arc is 6 issues, the goal is to make it, like to go long beyond that. And we plan for that. Like part of our initial pitch was like showcased season 1 or like the first mini arc and like where we leave off, because we're big advocates of like know where your story's going. Not like obviously like you want some room to grow and adapt and pivot, but you should be able to be like, this is where we want it to ultimately end up.
Totally.
That way
Don't,
we can lay
don't be like a Lost, that
like the show.
where it fizzles out, or even the last 2 seasons of Game of Thrones, like that kind of thing. For us, we're like, we love TV, so we were like, we're gonna do the Breaking Bad approach here. Know your beginning, middle, and end kind of thing.
There you go.
Yeah, so we had that all teed up and ready to roll. There's like certain B and C storylines that you'll see throughout season 1 of RAMGOD that will sort of like come into the limelight and pave way for like the next season if we can make it to that. But regardless, I think you'll be very happy with how season 1 ends, where you'll feel satisfied but want more, and that's the goal.
So I love your artist to begin with. Nice choice on the artist. But what made you decide to? Now you're saying that you're an artist yourself. What made you decide to not draw this yourself?
Well, I'm not nearly as good as Kanan White or Henry Prasetya. It's also extremely time consuming, even if I were to be as good. I don't know. I like more of the art direction side of things than the actual sort of legwork part of it. Yeah. Where like a lot of the original every artist that I work with, they either love me or hate me because I have a very clear vision and I'm very particular. I'm like, no, the eyes are too close together or they're too inset, like very specific with how things should look, or like the facial expression here isn't conveying the right emotion. But I'm not just like something's wrong and I don't know what's wrong, like do it again. Like no, very precise. It's like do this, match this, trace my version in some cases or whatever.
And also to add to that, like we are huge on creative briefs. We believe in whenever we work with any creative in any capacity, we like show them, don't tell them. As Morgan just said, we're very specific with our creative vision. We always have something in mind, and we don't expect anyone we work with to be mind readers. They're collaborators. So we want to make sure they fully understand our vision first, and then we give them room kind of to show their creative expression, in conjunction with our idea and our vision.
So I remember when we were talking before, you were talking about world building is a big concern, a big passion for you guys when you're telling a story. Do you like sketch out a rough Bible for this world before you give?
Great question.
Great question.
Yes, we totally do. As I was saying about the creative briefs and stuff, we like mood board everything. It's like our vision board, mood board, whatever it is. As I said, like I come from video production, so I'm used to boarding commercials out and things like that, where you understand the framing, the lighting, the perspective, the set design, the production design, everything. So
here's what the vehicles look like in general.
Exactly.
Here's what their cars look like. Here's how like what their phones look like. They don't have phones anymore. They have floating orbs that are connected to like an implant, and some people, like we really, in fact, when we were initially pitching this to heavy metal, I remember like Tommy Coreal, like when he was on the call with us, he was like the video call, and we were going. We started with, okay, here's the overview synopsis stuff, and then it was like the world, when we spent like, I don't know, 20 minutes just going through the world, and he's like, okay, tell me about the characters, and we're like, we're almost there, we still want. He's like, no, I get it, this world is extremely well detailed, and stuff is like, get to the characters, but that just goes to show you like how meticulously we crafted this world.
Totally. And what's funny about that is like I tend to not even overemphasize. I just love world building. And as Morgan said, like the texture of, everything, the landscape, the technology, the religion that the cars they drive, the clothes they wear. Morgan is the character guy. He's always been the character guy, and it's relatable characters, and just like what kind of makes them, like what are their passions, what are their likes, their dislikes, that kind of whole thing. So anyway, yeah, it's I lost my train of thought. I'm sorry.
Well, it's not even so much likes and dislikes. It's what are their motivations, right? Owen was saying what drives them. Like they need to be relatable. I think that no matter how cool of a world you create, if you don't create characters with substance that are both plausible and like relatable, where you can connect to them, you feel like I know what that character is feeling or going through, or I know someone like that person, whether it's me or someone that I know. That's the goal, right? Is to you ground the craziness and the really intricate world with like very just understandable and relatable characters. I know it's the word relatable like 20 times already, but that's very important when crafting a story, is finding characters that your audience connects to and grows attached to, really.
And so our entry into this world, your lead character, at least at the beginning, because I have a feeling that this world could jump around to a bunch of different characters, is a black guy written by a couple of Rosenblums. What made you go that way?
Good question. I think as a writer, I don't need to have been a certain thing necessarily in order for me to want to explore that story. I just think it's important that, because like, for example, I write dark fantasy. Was I a knight in medieval times? No. But I've done my homework on knights, and I understand the vision that I'm trying to craft. And ultimately, this is not a story about race. Like in this future, I'm sure, racism obviously exists, but that is not the core of the story by any means. So we cared less about like, oh, well, we, making sure that we're writing a black character, as opposed to, well, this could be any one character. But it was important to us that we wanted to add diversity to it, and to be cognizant and sort of like careful not to sort of piss off any like one that is of color, that might be like, why are two Jewish white guys writing about a black guy? Our lead story editor, Joseph Village, is a person of color that we had sought out to say, we want to make sure that we are not misrepresenting anything. And like, in addition to your wisdom and storytelling, also culturally, like if we're offbeat on something, like call it out.
And he's like an unbelievable.
And he was like, oh, okay, respect.
Yeah.
Like
you were going to him because he's a veteran in the space anyway.
Yeah, so like story side alone, like we would go for him just there. There's nothing to do with the fact that like, oh, and he happens to be a person of color. It was more like, oh, and please also
he's the editor in chief.
Yeah, he's the editor in chief of the magazine. So it was also like we had personally requested him to be our editor, because usually like when you work in a magazine, if there's multiple editors, you kind of just get assigned someone from the publisher, and they're all usually very talented. But we had gone at when we were speaking with Matt and like the higher ups at Heavy Metal, we had requested him and we explained it too. We said, in addition to him being like a veteran in the space and an excellent storyteller, culturally, we also want to make sure that we have our finger on the pulse with this. Not only that, but like our artist, Kanan, is another person of color as well. So like we were very careful about that. And we always ask, even though we have vision for how we want a certain character to be portrayed and certain art to be drawn or whatever it is, we have like this policy, which is best idea wins. So we encourage artists that if they feel strongly that like we're making a poor decision, or that like, the revision we gave them is like going to do damage to the story or the comic, like to speak up and just walk us through why, so that we can understand it, and then we can find common ground. Because we want everyone going into it agreeing, hopefully, that the choices that we all landed on improve the story.
And it doesn't matter who the idea is coming from.
Yeah.
Good.
There are no egos. We check it at the door.
Excellent.
Speaking of which, we had that intern at Heavy Metal, and she wound up becoming like an editor for us, kind of similarly, like going up the climbing the ranks, but just every opportunity, she wasn't someone that would just kind of sit in the corner. If she had an idea or something like that, like we would encourage her to speak up about it. And she was like way smarter than me and more well-read, and just like honestly, just her ideas were fantastic and stuff. So I would at one point I I started her as like, can you also proofread this for me? And then she gave like dialogue notes, and I was like, that's a good point. Really solid. So, echoing what Owen just said, we're big on like, I don't care who you are, where you come from, what your role is. If you're an intern that generally just gets coffee versus, and it's not like she was getting us coffee where we work remotely, but you get my point, is that all voices are valuable, but just make sure that like, if you're going to speak up, like you have something of substance, right, to talk about.
And don't just criticize. Like if you're going to criticize and break something down, give your suggestion on how it should be done better.
There you go.
Yeah, we're big on that.
So character wise, I love your characters. I love the dialogue. And that's, and that when it comes to cultural things, right? The thing that will pull me out of a story is when the dialogue doesn't ring true. And you guys have killed it when it comes to
that's a huge compliment. Thank you.
But it's so important. And I've read a lot of, let's just say, big name publishers' books recently, and I'm like, who authorized this? This sounds terrible. Where you've got people speaking in weird slang that doesn't ring true to the character. You're like, what? Why would they talk this way?
What's helpful with when writing dialogue is like literally thinking about another character from, whether it's a movie, a book, whatever it is, a real life. It could be someone that you can actually be like, this is how he talks, or she talks, or they talk, whatever. Totally. The idea is simply that if you can do that, it makes it so much easier to write that dialogue, because you're like, oh, I know how that person would answer that question. Or
also just like, and this goes for like teams and stuff, which I love, like co-writing this with Morgan. Like we're able to go back and forth in real time and say the dialogue out loud and be like, that's not what he would sound like. That he wouldn't say that. That person wouldn't say that like that. No. And then we call each other on those things, and it was like, no, it'd be more like this. And it's like conversational almost.
Yeah. And speaking of like writing dialogue, we actually write like live together, as opposed to just like, I'll work on this scene, you work on this scene, and then we'll compare notes. Like I don't like, sure, I do it that way, and I've done it that way. Especially with like clients when I'm like hired to write for them, because I don't want to be on a call with like a client writing for them, sort of. But when I'm collaborating like with Owen or some of my other co-writers that I've worked with, I do like writing in real time with them, because we were very meticulous with how we go about it. We never just start writing a script, like, ever. We may have a scene in mind, which might be the thing that spawns the story. Like we know we want to have this scene in our story, but really what we do is we beat it out with like scene by like an outline, right? Like where are we going to start the story? What's going to happen? Story like pulled out a little bit more, and then once we have that foundation kind of laid out, even by being like, in this scene, we're probably going to spend 2 to 3 pages here, and here's like kind of the pacing. Here's like the real climax of that scene, and this is why the scene's important. Whatever. When we finally get into writing the dialogue, we'll write it in real time, back and forth, and that it's like you're getting a sounding board in real time, which is really helpful. To say, that doesn't sound right, or when you hear yourself actually say it out loud, it's helpful, and then you can kind of get the feedback you want in real time. It's like, oh, well, how would they say it? And it's like, this is the word I'm choking on right now, or that I'm kind of stuck on. Like that doesn't sound like a natural way to say it. There's too many words in that sentence.
Yeah.
Like a big part of dialogue too is like subtext. Like I think some of the witty, like the best dialogue is the stuff that isn't actually literally saying what their intentions are, but it's like it's coming through it regardless.
Sure.
Right.
If that makes any sense.
I dig that. So your story, right? Well, this story that we're talking about today, anyway. RAMGOD Season 1, Issue 1. Give me the rundown. Give me the first 2 acts.
Okay, so first 2 acts. I'll try to find a way not to give away too much, but because a lot of the premise is like kind of revealed in all of issue 1. Like when we're setting the stage for the whole story, we just kind of give issue 1 because that's it. But it takes place in a cyberpunk future, in a city called New City, which it's meant to feel like a Gotham or Metropolis. Like we haven't given it an actual physical location, but it could
or
be
like Mega City from Dread and stuff like that.
But it's this giant industrial city Our lead character is this guy, Clint Bowler, who is a patrolman police officer, 35 years old, former superstar collegiate athlete that was supposed to go did go number one overall in the NFL to the Miami Sharks. And I know it's the Miami Dolphins, but we played around with stuff. It's like a throwback to any given Sunday. Anywho, Clint Bowler is someone that was supposed to have a totally different life, right? So how did he wind up as a cop? Well, we find out that like coming out of college, in his his junior year of college, like he started getting mixed up with some nefarious people. His godfather, like one of his high school teammates or whatever, that guy's dad is like a mobster, part of the Chinese mob, Mr. Zhao, and he had taken Clint underneath his wing and got him involved with some of the wrong people, saying that he had his best interests in mind. And ultimately, Clint wound up getting implicated with a bunch of like unsolved murders, like crime syndication, things like that. Where even though he didn't get indicted for it, he was, or like he didn't get charged, like he didn't go to jail for it. He wound up like kind of getting a blacklist title from like he wasn't allowed to, like no NFL team would touch him, no other teams in the like other sports would touch him. Sponsors that were all initially like riding his coattails were like, oh, don't touch him, he's like nuclear at this point. So he had to kind of change his everything. And you'd be like, well, how to become a cop? He called it, this is New City cyberpunk world, you can call in some favors, whatnot. And again, he was never officially indicted on that stuff. So it was like he kept his mouth shut. He's a good trooper in that regard. And so now he's living this completely different life. And he's got a teenage son, Malcolm, 15 years old, that he's not close with at all. And his son lives with his mom 95% of the time, and then like 1 weekend a year, he gets to go see his dad, and it's like awkward and uncomfortable because Clint doesn't really connect with his kid, and it's just his priorities are just kind of all backwards in a lot of ways. And so anyway, the story is really about it's called RAMGOD because there's this sport that's like in its early stages, right? It's like probably in year 3 or 4 or something like that, and it's taking over the globe. It's like the most crazed, exciting sport that's one part like American Ninja Warrior, one part Formula One racing, and then one part like UFC, like gladiator game combat on steroids. And it's unlike some of these other sports where, yeah, you can get hurt and maybe die. Like the mortality rate in RAMGOD's really high. And it's also extremely like cyber focused, where it's a physical sport, meaning you're not like logged into like VR or anything like that, but similar to like Mario Kart, how you can like get like you can go over like what's called a boost in the sport. You can get any sort of like enhancement to your vehicle or to your suit. It could be like a jetpack or like new armor. It's all exists in your
like
suit.
the Mario Kart element meets like the sponsored gifts from Hunger Games. Like if they had a baby, like that's kind of what it would be, more or less. And plus the sport itself is kind of structured like the way the Olympics are structured in terms of where like your team, it's like a point total system, and that from different competitions or heats as we call them, it's like you acquire a certain amount of points, then they carry over, and it's the cumulative total.
Yeah, so you guys explaining this now, and you've explained this to me before. I heard it and I thought, wow, this could be terrible. No, the execution on this, I believed it. I was hyped for the competition, and I loved it.
Thank you.
It could have gone really wrong, and it did. And in RAMGOD, it does not.
Yeah, even hearing myself explaining it, I'm like, I'm all over the place right now with like, there's so many different aspects to it. But like, we really, really planned out the sport as though it were a real sport. Like, we can tell you all the rules. Like, if you were like, well, what happens in this scenario? We wouldn't be like, oh, good question. We're like, oh, this is what happens. Like, we went through all of that stuff. Yeah. We have like, there's the regular season where all 8 teams are competing, which is really more of the Olympic-based scoring system. Then there's the playoffs where it's limited to 4 teams that are now all competing, right? And only the top 2 performing teams like advance to that. And then there's the finals where they go head to head. Right. So like there's different, what you get to see throughout the like season 1 or of the miniseries is like those different sort of parts where it's like, oh, all 8 teams are competing, which you haven't seen yet because that happens and later on, where when we introduce you to it, you're only seeing the final, so it's like a head-to-head matchup. And then one thing you're going to notice in our series too is that there's 2 main artists that we kind of jump between. There's the in-season RAMGOD. When I say in-season, I mean like the actual sports season of RAMGOD. when it's active, right? And then with the off season, when like it's in between the active competition and it's like the downtime where teams are sort of like training and getting ready for the following season, new rules are being implemented, which is a big part of the story too, because it's like a fledgling sport. The league is constantly trying new stuff to see like what sticks, right? Yep. And that like some stuff doesn't stick, but other stuff is like, that's a great idea. So this brings everything now full circle. Like, okay, well, how does RAMGOD and Clint and these two storylines kind of coincide? Well, there are 8 teams in the league of in the sport of RAMGOD, and 7 of them are owned and run by these big mega tech giant conglomerates, these corporate sponsors. And then there's one team, the people's team, called the Barracudas, that have no sponsor. And they are funded through like a Patreon styled crowdsourcing platform. And what we find out though is that that team gets their money from a different method, which is a little nefarious. And ultimately, going into the new season, the next sports season of RAMGOD, the new rules have been implemented that each team must add a 5th human player to their team, because also every team also is allowed 1 robot athlete. But now that with this new rule, every team has to bring on another player, and the one team that's doing some of this nefarious stuff like realize the person they're going to need to bring in is a badass athlete and can help them win, but then 2 is also going to be trustworthy, right? And be kind of into the the stuff that they're doing as like a side hustle. And so that's where kind of Clint falls into this thing, is like we learn that he's a former superstar athlete, and then something happens that gets him in front of the spotlight again, that kind of makes him like a 15 minutes of fame type thing, and people go, oh, wait a second, I remember that guy, puts him on the Barracuda's radar, and then he gets invited to tryouts.
Nice.
Oh, and mind you, Clint's kid, Malcolm, is a diehard RAMGOD fan, and he's a guppy, which means he's a fan of the Barracudas. That's what they call themselves, like the fans of the Barracudas. So he's a guppy like.
Very nice. Well, and that'll make for a nice bonding sort of thing.
Maybe. I mean, so that's the cool part of the story that you'll see too, is like you'd think that it would bring them closer together, and maybe it does, but then also like maybe it starts going to his head, and that Clint now starts prioritizing his new shot at his set, dreams over the relationship that he should be focusing on that's building. It's like it's cool because he's a very flawed hero, an anti-hero, and we love flawed heroes. And characters that kind of get in their own way sometimes and like have to make, and we love choices. We love presenting difficult choices for characters. And there's definitely one that like the longer he puts it off, the more it's going to affect him and everyone around him.
Totally. Also, something that I maybe Morgan, you glazed over here a little bit, just going back to the sports component of RAMGOD, something that because you said we put a lot of time and thought into the sports aspect of this.
Yeah, so this is way better than Quidditch, because that was
thanks. I appreciate that. The something we thought was super cool was like, if you've ever been like to Vegas or you've seen like sports betting and things like that, and you have all the kind of TVs going on at the same time showing different things, we were kind of like, what if like these different heats, they still affect, as I said, we said it like compared it to the Olympics, but we're like, what if they affected each other? So like, as we were talking about these things called boosts and whatnot, what if they could carry over from one competition to the other and give those players in the other competition a competitive advantage? So say you're not as good of a racer as you are as a fighter in the combat thing, and your teammate won in combat, but you're losing in race. If they win and they unlock the boost, that could carry over to you in the race, where it either gives you like NOS kind of thing. It unlocks a shortcut on the map that allows you to catch up and make up for lost time. Those kind of things, where if say viewers, we were thinking about if like we're like, okay, we're not huge NASCAR or Formula One fans, but if we were to watch that and we're bigger UFC fans, and then we see something, that's happening here affect this, that might make us want to watch the NASCAR racing aspect, Formula One more. Yeah. So we're like, how do you kind of, up the ante a little bit?
I really like that aspect.
Nice.
All right. So out of everybody in the world, let's go back to Art. Out of everybody in the world, what made you choose these artists. Now, and I say these, and maybe you can go in and tell a little more about the how and why you have more than one.
So it was just like anytime we're going for an art, like trying to find an artist, it's like the right fit. It's like we have a vision in our mind for stylistically tone, mood, right? Like what are we going for? Do you want to be more cartoony and like exaggerated emotions, or do you want it to be more anatomically correct and sort of realistic looking? And some of those things can be like, well, you can have a little bit of both, right? Maybe like the coloring can actually set the tone more and mood, whereas like, but you can still get a very anatomically correct style. I think when going into this, we knew the color wise that it had to be vivid and cyberpunky, right? Like kind of bright pinks and things like that. But also just like someone had to have a really good understanding of lighting, because that's a huge part of cyberpunk. And I think the colors really make our story sing. And then as far as like line art, it's also important to like line artists and sequential artists, right, that are doing the actual panel, like Kanan White and Henry Persetia, and even Marco Licati, who does our flashbacks. When we were looking, the first thing we always look at is like storytelling, like where are they placing the camera, right? The camera is like pretty much you, the reader. So every shot, right, it's like think about if like where the camera is placed to capture that. Is it a low angle shot? Is it a pulled out bird's eye view? Is it like, now while we're as writers generally telling the artist in the like the I don't, for anyone who hasn't read a comic book script out there, because I don't know how like accessible those are to everyone, it's like a movie or film script, right? Like that you've probably seen before. The only difference is that it's broken down by like panel and page, and you are actually describing to the artist what they should be drawing to a degree. So for example, if I was like panel one, like establishing shot of a cityscape, right, where we see like these giant skyscrapers with smog, things like that. And then panel two, now we're tight on like a crowd going, like this is the bustling community going to work every day, and everyone is masked, like fully masked, not just like a little thing, but like full on motorcycle helmet type thing to really set the tone for it. So like we would write it like that. So then parlaying that back to like finding the right artist, we look through different portfolios online. We have relationships with different artist management companies and like kind of their their representatives. And sometimes we will put out a brief and say, we like this, or here's an artist that we know is unavailable, but we really like their style. Or kind of putting together like almost like a mood board and say, who do you have that's be a good fit for this?
And then you do like test pages and things like that, to determine like, and then compare and contrast and be like, what?
And then so that leads to the like stage two, which is once we find the artist, I shouldn't say never, probably never. We never just like sign them up and without having them do a test page first, because there's like part of the working dynamic that you want to get a taste for too. So we'll do like a paid test where we'll ask them to be like, hey, we'll pay you like to do one page. Here's a script, read the script. Generally, the best way, if you're doing a series, the way we like to set it up is we'll be like, here, pick any 5 pages from the script that you like, that speak to you most, then just do the layouts of how you would do it on that. And then from those layouts, we will pick 1 page that we want you to take to sort of like full render. Full ink, final, like show us what the final version of that. What that allows us to do is get a feeling for how they interpret our script, right?
And their process.
Onto the page, their process, how easy it is to sort of like work with them also, communication-wise, things, because that's very important as well. And then we go through, we give revisions as we go, and we're like, cool. And then based on that, we're like, yep, that was a smooth process, or like the talent was great, but maybe like we didn't like the way that they made our revisions or things like that. It's just not a good fit kind of thing. So it's a process, and it usually takes several months just to find the right artist.
Yeah.
Nice. What about now you've got a separate person doing the designs, right? Don't you? Doing like that page layout where you've got
that's our letterer, yeah. So our letterer is like a top-notch graphic designer.
So nice.
Nahi, yeah, Ismail Nahad. He is a rock star, like super talented guy. I feel like he's gonna win an Eisner at some point for lettering, and just because he's so much more than just not that like I don't want to downplay the importance of lettering, but he's like a true graphic designer that like instead of just lettering, as you'll see, he makes these like fake advertisements.
Yeah.
So we're a big thing in our stories. We always do this. I think we've done it since Treadwater 12 years ago. Is we have these like in-world ads that we don't put any ads for other real products that exist in our world in between the scenes at the very end, maybe, right? Like once you're done with the chapter, there might be
Sure.
like also other books from Morgan and Owen Rosenblum, but during the actual book, like to sort of help with the pacing and like do further storytelling, we'll create these like fake ads for products and for things that only take place inside of the world of RAMGod, which is cool.
It's just further world building, like Total Recall did that, RoboCop, like things like that,
Yeah, Fallout, right?
Yeah, Fallout, exactly. I'm a big.
So
I don't have any. For some reason, I'm in the one area in my house where I don't have a bunch of Fallout behind me.
Cool. You think they did a good job with the show?
I think they did a good job with the show. I mean, there's always when you're super, when you're a super fan of a property, there's always things that you would like, oh, I would have done this different or that different. But overall, that was really enjoyable.
Yeah, I agree. I thought it was well executed for sure.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I want a ton more. I love
Most people.
I love Fallout, beginning to end. I would like for them to go back to Fallout 1 and just be like, hey, we're gonna do this on modern engines and just start it all
Totally.
over.
yeah, they did that with like with a bunch of games, in particular like Final Fantasy. Like we grew up with like Final Fantasy 7 and stuff like that.
Yeah,
When
for
that was
sure.
cool to see them like rebirth the rebirth thing. So
Totally. But I mean, like what Fallout was able to do from bringing it from like the game to the screen was a way better execution than like Halo, for example.
Yeah, I enjoyed that show, but it doesn't seem like Halo, really.
Yeah. It kind of I mean, I even know that the creators like didn't even play the game or anything. And like I was like, at least if you're gonna adapt the source material, at least know what you're adapting.
For real. It always makes me crazy where you see these people where they're like, "Yes, I'm playing this character and no, I didn't want to influence my choices um by reading the source material." And everybody who's a fan is like, "What are you talking about?
Yeah.
Why? Just do it.
Exactly.
Get some intelligence. Get some."
Like you're actually being like almost like disrespectful to the fans and the source material by just ignoring it.
Yeah. And I understand when you've got things like, your comic books characters that that go back, whether it's, DC to the 30s or Marvel to the 60s.
Sure.
They're a little sketchy to begin with. They're products of a different time.
Sure.
In so many ways.
They're
And so,
dated. I get
well, okay, I understand you're not going to act like that, but still be true to at least the current versions of the characters.
it. No.
And one of the things that, well, really in just seeing a few pages on your website to begin with, I thought, oh, this is gonna be a film or a really awesome series. And I know that you guys
Right.
think this the entire time, and you've already done all the work,
Not all of it. Not all of
Well,
it. But we
but
do like to show, don't tell. And as I said, being that my background is in video production, I'm like, as I said, like creating a script, right? Writing a script and then doing like a comic is kind of like that. We always start where our source material kind of exists there. And me coming from video production and being on set all the time and knowing how that works with actors and everything else and dealing with animation and post, I know how that works. So I'm kind of like, if we are making something, we always like to, for the source material to be able to be adapted into different mediums and different formats to be consumed by fans of that story and that world in a variety of ways, whether that's a video game, as I said, a comic, a board game, like we're doing a board game. So they're just like different types of ways of interacting, with the story and the characters in the world.
Yeah.
And
Well, unlike those people who were doing, Battleship or whatever, there's not a lot. You're giving a whole lot more to a future filmmaker, or set of them. Hopefully you'll be included. Because I really feel like, oh, this is a gimme. This is like, this has got to be picked up by somebody.
for from your mouth to God's ears. All right. I hope that is the case too, you know, and plus what you were saying before about like us putting the thought into the actual sport itself. When we created the sport, we thought of it. I mean, Morgan and I are sports fans anyway, but we thought of it almost as if you were playing the RAMGOD video game, how the actual dynamics in the video game would work. You know, if we were like playing Gran Turismo or like mixed with different things, we're like, how would that actually work? And even with creating the comic, when we had the stuff in the margins, we like viewed that almost as if it was like the UI elements in a video game. We're like, what would you see kind of as you were navigating the space?
I did definitely enjoy that. Yeah, and you know that did occur to me as well. And I would also like to play your video game, sir.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Also, with the margin thing, that was something that we turned a negative into a positive, because with the resizing from Heavy Metal Magazine's pages and, you know, going to single issue format outside of the magazine, we were like, do we want to cut the artwork here? And we were like, no, we'll just shrink it here, and then we'll use the margins for these, and we'll put the UI elements here. And now, like, we can't imagine doing this without having those graphics and UI stuff in the margins. We're like, that adds so much.
It's beautiful. It's it kind of reminds me of the tech version of did you ever read what's it called? Fables, Bill Willingham.
Yeah, I didn't read it, but I know of it.
I know what you're talking
anyway,
about.
In the margins, what is it? Gosh, I can't remember the artist name right now. Anyway, in the margins, you would find interesting things as well.
Yep. World building, subtext, all that type of thing. Throw in your Easter eggs.
I just think it just adds to like the enjoyment of it. Like I love little details and things, right? And being able like, even when I know I'll watch a lot of like YouTube videos where the content creators kind of like give their theories on like, you know, in just this trailer, you can see this in the background, which I think means this, like that kind of stuff. Like we try to approach like our storytelling with stuff like that too. Like what else can we kind of put in the background
Morgan,
here? That
I remember this, and this stood out to me. Morgan was reading a book that I think like, what was it, a J.J. Abrams book? The one with like what was the name of that, Morgan?
Oh, I think it was called S, book, Ship of Theseus or Book of Theseus.
Yes, I think it's
Book of S.
Yeah, like Ship of Theseus, but whatever Morgan just.
Are you familiar with the Ship of Theseus story?
Is that the thing where it's like it's always, you know, when is it not the ship?
Yeah, it's like if you're constantly rebuilding the ship, at what point is it no longer the same ship if you've repaired all the parts? But like the idea behind it, I guess they took like a real story, like a famous story, and they did something. They made a second story in the margins. I'll explain. So imagine like you checked out or got your hands on a library book, right, from your university's library, and there's like a bunch of like different colored writing like all in the margins all over, and it's like a conversation between a grad student and like this undergrad classman who are like a female and a male that like kind of strike up like a friendship that I guess turns into a romance as they realize that there's like the author of this book was supposedly like went missing and was murdered, and they're actually trying to solve it, but they never meet one another. They both keep like renting the same book from the library and then just giving each other notes back. And it's like, oh, I think I missed you. Did you go home for Thanksgiving kind of thing? It's like, yeah, by the way, while I was home, I went to check out that you know, this person, or I contacted a PI and he said this. And then he's like, oh, interesting, because I got this information. And like they're solving a mystery that's like in the pages of the story. You can read both. You can read literally just the story. And I'm surprised with how they were able to do that, because they make every color of their pen is like a different semester for them.
I'm sure the printing costs and some of that, like the actual production thing, were probably.
And so this is a book that you can buy.
It's a book. Yeah, it's a book. And why
so you read through and you read the initial story, and then you go and read all of these margin notes.
Or you can do it backwards. You can not read the story at all and then just read. And then like the other cool thing too is inside of the book, there's like they put other stuff like little notes to one another.
Postcards,
stamps like yeah, postcard or something like that, or like I went to this bar and found this like coaster or whatever, and look what was written on the back of it or something. Like there's like clues in the book, so you're like putting stuff together.
Yeah,
Like what you don't want to do is like when you first get it, like open it up and then like have it fall out, because then you'll be like, where is that supposed to go back?
Yeah. Anyway, I was just using that as an example from like a design and subtext and like Easter egg kind of thing, where I remember, and I haven't read it, I just remember Morgan reading it, and I was like, what is that? And I just thought it was so creative with how they did it that I was like, it's like you just use different types of elements. And I was like, as inspiration, I was like, that's just so cool.
And this was J.J. Abrams did that?
Yeah, I mean, he was up. It was him and someone else, and I feel like an asshole not remembering the other person, because I don't know how much JJ actually wound up doing of this versus the actual other writer.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna make it a case to make sure that I know the other writer's name.
That's funny. I will have to check.
But it definitely, like, I mean, JJ is I think the reason that I like, put it on my radar.
Dorst. Shout out to Doug Dorst.
Is that his name?
That is what
you
it
Google
is.
That? All right, Doug Dorst.
Yeah,
there you go.
S. It's called S by Doug Dorst and J.J. Abrams. Yes.
All right.
Shout out. Doug, we know who you are. Doug Dorst.
We do now.
We do now. We do now.
So let's see. Oh, well, one thing that I want to know now, like I say, this is coming out the same week as San Diego Comic-Con. We will get this up, this video up ahead of that, so people can learn about this book and make sure to get down to their local comic book store to get the first issue of RAMGOD. In 17 covers, or how many do you have?
There's like
Might as well.
A lot. I don't know, 8 or 9 or something like that variants. Some of them are like the same cover, but with like a gloss metallic,
I saw that you had a bunch. I was hoping that you guys would be there. Is Massive going to be at San Diego Comic-Con, or?
I just texted on that on the side. I'm like, do we know if Massive's going to be there? I think they are.
Yeah, we both think they are, but
they're in California, which I know is a pretty long state. So if they're going to be in San Diego or Los Angeles or wherever, I don't know if they're going to make the trip. But
we think so. We're getting the confirmation.
Yeah.
So we'll
circle
back
on their website. Hold on, it may actually say it. Like, we're going to be.
We'll circle back. Back.
I want to know where we can now. You guys are just not going to be there, so I want to know where can we meet the Rosenblum brothers?
Well, definitely at New York Comic-Con, because we are New Yorkers, so that for sure.
That's in like October. So we're currently working with Chris Yates and Massive's marketing team to like set up some book signings for issue 1 at like around New York, Brooklyn, Manhattan, everywhere, the tri-state area maybe.
Gotta come a little bit south. Get to Baltimore Comic-Con. Have you been to Baltimore Comic-Con?
I haven't. No. I would go. I'm just a
San Diegan. Wait, hold on. I'm a San Diegan.
There you go.
But Baltimore Comic-Con, oh my God, is amazing. Is so comic oriented, as opposed to sorry, my hair's doing weird crap. Is so comic oriented. As opposed to Hollywood, and people get upset about they're over Hollywoodizing my Comic-Con, and I get that, and I get that hey, where that's where the money is, but if you want a convention that really loves its comic creators, check out Baltimore Comic-Con. You will not be disappointed.
All right.
Yeah, if we can crash at your place, we're there.
Hey man, I got an extra room right here. It's no problem. We're good. We're good. Right, although I am like an hour and 15 minutes south of Baltimore, but it'll be fine. We'll go up there every day.
We'll Airbnb it. We're all good.
Yeah. Anyway, and that one is in September. So if you if you have the ability, I highly recommend it. Whether it's this year or another year. And then beyond that, what else you got? What did we skip? What did we miss about RAMGOD?
I mean, we covered a lot. I think we didn't get a chance to really talk too much about like the different heists and stuff that the team kind of.
We don't want to spoil it too much, There's definitely
We
that.
can come back to all that. I mean, we can
Yeah.
have another one of these, no problem.
Yeah, there's definitely that kind of, original Point Break and Fast and Furious element in
And
here.
like the town, like we were looking at all like the coolest heists that we've seen, from like the Dark Knight opening scene with like the Joker, and with all of them wearing the clown masks and stuff. Like our story begins with like a pretty cool heist too, that we think is like a really cool way to kick it off. And we wanted, rather than just having like the robbers like all wear the same mask every time, because it's the future, they wear like pretty much like these cool tight fitting motorcycle helmets that are all black but like project pixelated like 8-bit masks
Yeah.
on them. So every heist they have like different digi masks, and they're always themed. So like one might be like Halloween themed,
Yeah.
where they're like monsters, and the next one might be like emojis or like kabuki masks, or like they're all different.
I wanted to talk to you guys about this too. Okay, I'll keep it short. During at the beginning of COVID, there was a Kickstarter for some masks that would like come together in the middle, and it was like straps on the back and big, full face things. Did you
Yeah,
guys see those?
I did. Yeah, that
And
was actually it. I mean, as we said, we created this during COVID when everyone was masking up and kind of the world was ending, or so we thought. And this was one of those things where like the first page of issue 1 is basically talking about like air quality and like different people in different masks, and basically the air quality being based on the wealth of the neighborhood that you're in, essentially.
that's nuts.
And we kind of like we thought of it as like, what if like some of these large buildings and skyscrapers, in the same way they have solar panels now everywhere, we were like, what if like they had like a mechanism like an air filter that was just like a giant air filter, where almost like the back of it is kind of dusty and gross, but the front of it like has like green coming out and whatever. It was just like interesting to us. We were like, why not? Why not?
That
So
would be
just messing
cool.
around with it, and that's why you'll see in the margins too, they'll talk about air quality and things.
Well, see, not everything can be a Rosenblum graphic novel, because I went and backed those things. I got one for me, one for my wife, one for my mother-in-law, and they never got produced.
Mm,
It was one of those sad ones.
got it, got it. Yeah, you're saying that was a Kickstarter?
That was a Kickstarter. Yeah.
That's funny. You should also bring up a
You're
Kickstarter.
saying that they never got produced, or it never got funded?
No, it got funded. It got way funded, but they never got produced. They were like, "Sorry, I gave all my money to this manufacturer, and they stole my money. Sorry, bye."
All right, that's not going to happen with us. It
Yeah.
No,
hasn't happened before. I mean, like if we get screwed,
I've never seen that happen with a
we're not
comic.
going to pass the screwing on to our
No, definitely not. Definitely.
backers. That's just not like.
But we didn't even mention that we were doing a Kickstarter, more than so many people know about it.
Oh no, I didn't know about that either.
Oh, you didn't? Oh,
No,
okay.
I
So
remember that you had done one previously.
yeah,
Um,
we've done 2 so far. We've done one for Treadwater. That was
mhm.
like our first ever series, and then we did one more recently in 2020-ish, for Winds of Numa Sera, which it started on Kickstarter, and then it later got picked up by Dark Horse, which was pretty cool for us. We kind of use Kickstarter a lot as like a jumping off point, like to kickstart,
Yeah.
And more recently, we've converted the graphic novel into a board game, and this is what we're doing. We're launching this board game, this beauty, in next week on
Oh wow.
July 16th, Tuesday at 11 a.m. Eastern time.
Yeah, we got this Kickstarter and RAMGOD issue 1 being
A week
released
of like
within a week of each other.
Wow.
So
And
crazy.
so will we find your board game in comic stores or game stores or both, or not anywhere else but
only
Kickstarter?
on Kickstarter for now. Like only we think if we don't like we have to have a successful Kickstarter before it goes to retail. If we do, then we can get in retail stores, but no retailer will care to carry it unless we can show that it's got like a nice sizable fan base and following. What's cool is that like because it started as a graphic novel, there's like a nice little overlap of like gamers to comic readers. It's not humongous. I mean, and the other thing too is like it's not like our fantasy comic or graphic novel wins is a like a household name at this point, right? It's not like, oh, the Dark Souls board game where people are like, oh, I know Dark Souls or Game of Thrones or Lord of the Rings. It's more niche. But the hope is that like, I mean, look, you probably get the feeling at this point that we do our homework when it comes to making like original worlds and fresh but familiar characters. So we think that Wins is like really special. Obviously, we're biased. We wrote it, but everyone that's read it and reviewed it for the most part has said it's like an incredible original series. So where can you find it? windsofnumasera.com is like our main website where you can kind of learn about it. It also has like a link to sign up for like to be alerted when the Kickstarter goes live, because we're going to be like doing like exclusive discounts for anyone that gets in like the first like few days.
And it's our medieval dark fantasy property. So for fans of that genre, if they're not into cyberpunk stuff, check it out because it's awesome. And you don't have to have read the graphic novel to enjoy playing the game. But if you have read the graphic novel and you want to read the graphic novel and then play the game, it's going to be that much more rewarding.
So wait, your Kickstarter is going to start or end next week?
Start. We haven't launched it yet.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah.
All right. So we can go and say, hey, all right, we will give you a link along with this video.
What I tell everyone is like, you don't have to back the game. Watch the video. If you're not hyped after just watching this 3-minute video that like gives you a really cool animated like short film thing and then shows you how we bring this world into a playable experience, and then it has like a nice little heartstring element to it where we show, we talk about the three of us being best friends and brothers, like growing up, like being super fans and wanting to chase our dreams, which is very genuine and authentic in that we want, like we did this together against all odds kind of thing, because it was expensive, long, and difficult. And we ran out of money a long time ago, but kind of kept chugging along, and we're like, we have to get it right. We can't put the game out early before it's ready. And we play tested it with at conventions, right? We were doing all these convention tours and getting feedback until finally the main feedback we were getting was, when can I buy this game? Right. And then like once we started hearing that as the main, like, hey, any comments or questions? And they're like, yeah, when can I get it? We were like, I think it's ready. Like, and so now we're finally launching it. And we sent it out for like reviews and stuff. And the reviews have been like, never heard of these publishers, but man, this game rocks. Yeah. Like,
and as Morgan said, this is our first like venture into the board game space, and we hadn't done it before. And it's been trial by combat. We were like, oh, if you think creating a comic or graphic novel is tough, like create a board game. It is a different beast in and of itself.
Sounds rough.
It's really rough, but the community the tabletop community is fantastic. Like, don't get me wrong, I love comics and I love the comic community and everything else. Tabletop is just like, everyone is just so helpful, and it's really just it's been a very rewarding experience for both of us.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, all right. Anything else that we need to hit upon before we go?
What I would say is like a message to everyone is like, as indie creators, because even though Massive is a big publisher, or up and coming big publisher, like this is a creator owned story, right? So like we ultimately funded the comic ourselves and the artwork and all that other stuff. So like at the very least, just go into your comic shop and ask your comic guys about it. Be like, hey, do you guys have this book? To put it on the radar? That would help us. Even if like you don't, it's not for you for whatever reason, or sure. That kind of stuff really does help us.
Definitely.
Yeah, I think that once this takes off, everyone is going to know about it. So cool. Hey, thanks so much, Morgan and Owen. And hey, thanks everybody for watching. For Morgan and Owen and Massive Comics' latest thing, I'm Kevin Gaussoin, and this is Comics Online.